12 hours. That's how long Alexander Kane managed to keep his promise before everything unraveled. 12 hours of restraint, of gentleness, of treating her like porcelain that might shatter at the slightest pressure. But when midnight struck and she whispered those 3 words against his neck, when her inexperienced hands found the buttons of his shirt with trembling determination, when she looked at him with those green eyes full of trust and desire, and something that looked dangerously close to love, every ounce of his legendary control simply evaporated. The silk sheets of the honeymoon suite would bear witness to what happened next. Her soft cries, his desperate groans, the way they moved together, as if their bodies had been designed specifically for this moment, for each other. And when dawn finally broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, when he saw the evidence of her innocence staining the white fabric beneath them, Alexander Kane, the man who had built a pharmaceutical empire through ruthless calculation and emotional detachment, felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that felt terrifyingly like forever. If you want to discover how a contract marriage between strangers transformed into a love that rewrote every rule they'd ever known, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like if you believe that sometimes the most unexpected arrangements lead to the deepest connections, and tell me in the comments what you think about marriages that start as business deals but end as love stories. Your support here means everything. The law office smelled of old leather and expensive cologne, the kind of scent that whispered of power and money and deals made in shadows. Outside, Seattle's rain created rivers down the windows, turning the city into an impressionist painting of gray and silver. Inside, 24-year-old Sophie Chen sat in a chair that cost more than her monthly rent, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking, and tried to understand how her life had arrived at this impossible moment. She wore her only professional outfit, a navy dress she'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago when she'd interviewed for her position at Seattle General Hospital. Her nurse's badge still hung around her neck because she'd come straight from a double shift, 14 hours of caring for patients who couldn't afford their medications, who chose between eating and treatment, who trusted her with their most vulnerable moments. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore no makeup because she'd learned long ago that pretty didn't pay the bills. Across the massive mahogany desk sat Alexander Kane, and Sophie had to actively stop herself from staring. At 36, he was the kind of man who made rooms go quiet when he entered. Not just because of the impeccable cut of his Tom Ford suit or the Patek Philippe watch that probably cost more than her student loans, but because of the aura of absolute authority he carried like a second skin. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw could have been carved from granite, and his ice-blue eyes held an intelligence that felt almost predatory. He looked at her the way a chess master looks at the board, calculating moves she couldn't even imagine. "You understand the terms," his lawyer said, sliding a document across the desk that had to be 50 pages long. 1 year of marriage. You'll live in Mr. Kane's penthouse, attend necessary social functions, and present as a devoted couple in public. In exchange, all your debts will be cleared immediately. Your father's medical bills will be paid in full, and you'll receive $2 million at the end of the 12-month period. Sophie's eyes stung, but she refused to let the tears fall. $2 million. Her father's cancer treatment covered. The crushing weight of nursing school loans erased. The chance to maybe finally breathe without the constant panic of drowning in debt. All she had to do was pretend to love a man who looked at her like she was a business acquisition. "Why me?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling eyes. "Because you're perfect for what I need. You're educated, well-spoken, beautiful in an understated way that won't make people suspicious. You're clearly not after my money, because you don't even know how to hide your discomfort in expensive spaces. And most importantly, you're desperate enough to actually go through with this." The bluntness should have offended her, but Sophie appreciated the honesty more than false flattery. "What do you get out of this?" "My grandmother's will stipulates that I must be married before my 37th birthday to inherit her controlling shares in Kane Pharmaceuticals. She believed that a man without a family couldn't be trusted to run a company that affects millions of lives." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She was a romantic. "I'm a realist. This arrangement benefits us both." Sophie looked down at the contract, at the tiny print that represented a year of her life, at the signature line that felt like signing away her soul. Her phone buzzed in her purse. A text from the hospital billing department. Another notice about her father's outstanding balance. A reminder that his next round of chemotherapy was scheduled but couldn't proceed until payment was arranged. She thought about her father, the man who had worked 3 jobs to put her through nursing school, who had never once complained about his own pain, who deserved so much better than dying because his daughter couldn't afford to save him. She thought about her own dreams, about maybe one day working for Doctors Without Borders, about traveling and healing and making a difference. Dreams that seemed impossible under the weight of debt that grew larger every month. And she thought about the man across the desk, this stranger with cold eyes and a business proposition where her heart should be, and wondered if a person could survive a year of pretending without losing themselves entirely. "Where do I sign?" The wedding happened 3 days later at the courthouse, a transaction masquerading as a ceremony. Alexander wore another perfect suit. Sophie wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd borrowed from her roommate. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, except for the lawyer who served as witness and probably had a confidentiality agreement thicker than the marriage contract itself. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was brief, professional, completely devoid of feeling. Sophie felt nothing except the strange weight of the ring now on her finger, a platinum band with a diamond so large it felt obscene. "Welcome to the arrangement, Mrs. Kane," Alexander said as they left the courthouse, and Sophie noticed he didn't say welcome to the family or welcome to my life. Just the arrangement. As if she needed the reminder that this was business, not romance. That evening, Alexander's driver, a silent man named Marcus, who looked like he moonlighted as a bodyguard, brought her to the penthouse. The building was in downtown Seattle, all glass and steel, and the kind of understated luxury that only the truly wealthy could afford. The lobby had actual art, not prints, actual Chihuly glass sculptures that caught the light like frozen fire. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor. When the elevator doors opened directly into the living space, Sophie had to remind herself to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of Seattle, the Space Needle glowing in the distance, Elliott Bay stretching dark and vast, the city lights creating constellations below. The interior was all clean lines and expensive neutrals, cream leather sofas, dark wood floors that gleamed abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It felt absolutely nothing like a home. "Your room is down that hallway, second door on the left," Alexander said, not looking at her as he poured himself a scotch from a crystal decanter. "You'll have your own bathroom and closet. I've had it stocked with appropriate clothing for the events we'll need to attend. If anything doesn't fit, let Maria know. She's the housekeeper. Comes in daily." "We're not sharing a room?" Sophie asked before she could stop herself. Alexander finally looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "This is a business arrangement, Sophie, not a real marriage. I'll need you by my side in public, but in private, we maintain appropriate boundaries. You have your space. I have mine. It's cleaner that way. Cleaner, as if feelings were something that could be contained, compartmentalized, kept in their designated areas like files in a cabinet. Sophie nodded, swallowing the strange disappointment that rose in her throat. Of course, that makes sense. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophie learned the choreography of their arrangement. Alexander left for work at 6 every morning, returned around 8 in the evening. They ate dinner together, conversations limited to logistics, upcoming events, people she needed to know, the backstory they'd created about meeting at a hospital charity gala, about a whirlwind romance, about him being swept away by her compassion and intelligence. All lies, but lies they told with convincing detail. Sophie continued working her shifts at the hospital, refusing to quit despite Alexander's suggestion that it might be easier to focus on her role as his wife. The hospital is where I'm actually useful, she told him, where I'm actually me, not just playing a part. He'd studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. As you wish. But you'll need to reduce your hours. We have obligations. Their first public appearance together was a pharmaceutical industry gala at the Four Seasons. Sophie wore a gown that Alexander's stylist had selected, an emerald silk that clung to curves she didn't know she had, with her hair professionally styled and makeup applied by someone who made her look like a stranger in the mirror. You look acceptable, Alexander said when she emerged from her room, and Sophie hated how much she wished he'd said beautiful instead. At the gala, he transformed. The cold, distant man became charming, attentive, playing the role of devoted husband with an ease that made her wonder if anything about him was real. His hand stayed at the small of her back, warm and possessive. He introduced her to everyone as my wife Sophie, with something that almost sounded like pride. He brought her champagne and made sure she was never left alone with people she didn't know. And when an older businessman made a slightly inappropriate comment about how Alexander had married well, his eyes went arctic. My wife is a cardiovascular ICU nurse who saves lives while most people are sleeping. I'm the one who married well. The defense surprised her. The way he'd said my wife with that edge of warning, as if she were actually precious to him, made something flutter dangerously in her chest. Later, as they slow danced because the evening required it, Sophie felt the solid warmth of his body against hers, smelled his cologne, cedar and something darker, felt his hand spread across her lower back. You're good at this, she said quietly, playing the devoted husband. He looked down at her, and for just a moment, something in his expression shifted. Who says I'm playing? Before she could process that, before she could ask what he meant, he was spinning her out and back in, and the moment was gone. But something had changed. Some invisible line had blurred. Over the following weeks, small moments began to accumulate like snow building into an avalanche. Alexander started asking about her day, actually listening to her stories about difficult patients and small victories. He learned that she liked jasmine tea and began having it stocked. When she came home exhausted from a particularly brutal shift, she'd find dinner waiting, not from his usual chef, but takeout from the Thai place she'd mentioned liking. She discovered he worked 16-hour days not out of greed, but because he genuinely believed his company could change healthcare, could make treatments accessible, could save lives the way she did, but on a larger scale. She learned about his grandmother, who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident, who had been his only source of warmth in a childhood defined by boarding schools and emotional isolation. She saw him at 3 a.m, unable to sleep, standing at the windows looking out at the city with an expression of such profound loneliness that it made her chest ache. And he noticed things about her, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking, how she always kicked off her shoes the moment she entered the apartment, that she sang off key in the shower and always ordered her coffee with too much cream, that she cried at animal rescue videos but maintained perfect composure when telling families their loved ones hadn't survived. 3 months into their arrangement, everything changed. Sophie came home to find Alexander in his study, his head in his hands, looking more human and broken than she'd ever seen him. "What's wrong?" She moved toward him without thinking, her hand reaching for his shoulder. "My grandmother," he said, his voice rough. "She's gone." The funeral was small, as per her wishes. Alexander delivered the eulogy with perfect composure, but Sophie saw the way his hands trembled slightly when he touched the casket, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw, recognized the signs of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. Back at the penthouse that night, Alexander poured himself a drink with shaking hands. She was the only person who ever. He started, then stopped. "The only person who what?" Sophie asked gently. "Loved me without conditions," he finished, and the raw pain in his voice cracked something open inside her. Sophie crossed the space between them, took the glass from his hand, and pulled him into her arms. For a moment, he stood rigid, shocked, as if kindness were a foreign language he'd forgotten how to speak. Then, something broke. His arms came around her, crushing her against his chest, his face buried in her hair, and she felt his whole body shudder with grief he'd probably never allowed himself to express. They stood like that for a long time. Sophie didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix his pain. She just held him, one hand stroking his back in slow, soothing circles the way she'd comforted countless patients, countless families, let him break apart in the safety of her presence. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but dry. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." "Stop," Sophie said firmly. "You're human, Alexander. You're allowed to grieve. You're allowed to need someone." He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Why are you so kind? Even when you don't have to be? It's not part of our contract." "Because that's who I am," she said simply. "Contract or not." Something in his expression shifted, softened. He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You're remarkable. Do you know that?" Sophie's breath caught. The air between them had changed, charged with something electric and dangerous. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his eyes dropping to her lips. Sophie. Her name on his lips was a question, and a warning, and a plea all at once. "Yes?" she barely whispered. "Tell me to stop. Tell me this is just the arrangement. Tell me you don't feel this too." But she couldn't, because somewhere between the careful distance and the practiced performances, between the quiet dinners and the shared glances, between being strangers and pretending to be married, something real had grown. Something terrifying and inevitable and absolutely not part of the contract. "I can't tell you that," she admitted, "because it would be a lie." Alexander made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between relief and surrender. His other hand came up to frame her face, his forehead resting against hers. "This complicates everything. I know. We should maintain boundaries. We should." But neither of them moved away. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Sophie's eyes fluttered closed. "If we do this," he said, his voice rough, "if we cross this line, I need you to understand something. This won't be part of the arrangement anymore. This will be real. For me, it's already been real. I need it to be real for you too." Sophie opened her eyes, met his intense gaze. "When? When did it become real?" "The first night you came home exhausted and fell asleep on the couch, and I carried you to your room. You curled into me, trusting even in sleep, and I stood there holding you for 20 minutes because I couldn't bear to put you down. That's when I knew I was in trouble." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "For me, it was the day you defended me at the gala. When you made it clear I wasn't just an accessory, but someone you valued. No one's ever done that before. Then, we're both in trouble, he said, and finally, he kissed her. It wasn't like the brief, businesslike kiss at their courthouse wedding. This was fire and hunger and 3 months of desperate restraint finally breaking. His lips moved against hers with a reverence that made her knees weak, his hand sliding into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. Sophie's fingers clutched at his shirt, pulling him closer, pouring every confused feeling she'd been suppressing into the way she kissed him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers again. Stay with me tonight. Not because of the contract. Because you want to. Sophie knew this was the moment that would change everything. If she said yes, there would be no pretending anymore. No safe emotional distance. If she said yes, she was admitting that somewhere along the way, she'd fallen for the man behind the arrangement, had seen past the cold exterior to the lonely, grieving, surprisingly gentle soul underneath. If she said yes, she was risking her heart in ways the contract had never required. Yes, she whispered. He swept her into his arms, carrying her as if she weighed nothing, and Sophie laughed against his neck at the old-fashioned romance of it. His bedroom was through a door she'd never entered, decorated in the same sophisticated neutrals as the rest of the penthouse, but somehow more personal. Books on the nightstand. A photograph of a young woman she recognized as his grandmother, evidence of the private person he kept hidden from the world. Alexander set her down gently beside the bed, his hands trembling slightly as they found the zipper of her dress. Are you sure? We can stop. We don't have to. Sophie reached up and cupped his face, making him look at her. I'm sure. But Alexander, I need to tell you something. What? I've never. She swallowed hard, feeling her cheeks burn. I haven't done this before. He went completely still, his eyes widening. You're saying you're a virgin? She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. I know it's probably weird at 24, but with nursing school and taking care of my dad and the debt, there was never time for relationships, never anyone I trusted enough. And now you probably think, Sophie. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. I'm honored, humbled, and absolutely terrified of hurting you. We'll go slow. I promise. I'll be so gentle. Just tell me if anything is too much, if you want to stop. Promise me. I promise. What followed was a study in restraint and revelation. Alexander undressed her with shaking hands, whispering how beautiful she was with each piece of clothing that fell away. When she stood before him in nothing but the lamplight, vulnerable and exposed, he looked at her with such raw want, tempered by such careful tenderness, that she felt tears sting her eyes. You're perfect, he breathed, and she believed him. He laid her on the bed like she was something precious, something sacred, and proceeded to map every inch of her skin with his hands and lips until she was trembling and gasping his name. When he finally positioned himself above her, braced on his forearms so he could see her face, he paused. Last chance to change your mind. I don't want to change my mind. I want you. Then you have me, he said. All of me, for as long as you'll keep me. The first press of him inside her was strange, uncomfortable, her body uncertain about this invasion. Alexander held completely still, his arms shaking with the effort of restraint, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Breathe. Sophie, just breathe. Tell me when. She focused on his face, on the way he looked at her like she was his entire world, on the feeling of connection that went beyond the physical. The discomfort gradually eased. Okay, she whispered. You can move. He did, slowly, carefully, watching her face for any sign of pain. And somewhere in the careful movements, in the whispered endearments, In the way their eyes locked and held, the discomfort transformed into something else, something building and tightening and overwhelming. "Alexander," she gasped, not knowing what she was asking for. "I know," he groaned against her neck. "I've got you. Just let go. I've got you." When she finally shattered, it was with his name on her lips and his arms holding her safe. He followed moments later, his control finally breaking as he buried his face in her hair and surrendered to the same overwhelming sensation. After, as they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, Sophie felt the wet warmth between her legs and knew without looking what it meant. Alexander noticed her stillness. "What's wrong? Did I hurt you?" "No," she said, but her voice was small. "You were perfect. It's just the evidence." He lifted his head, following her gaze to the small stains on the sheet, and his expression transformed into something Sophie couldn't name. Wonder, possession, tenderness, something that looked dangerously close to love. "Sophie," he said, his hand coming to rest on her cheek. "Do you have any idea what this means to me? That you trusted me with this? That you gave me something so precious? I don't take that lightly. I don't take you lightly." She felt tears slip down her temples. "I didn't expect this. Any of this. When I signed that contract, I thought I could keep my heart separate. Keep it just business. When did you realize you couldn't?" She thought about it, really considered the question. "The night of your grandmother's funeral. When you let me see you break. When you trusted me with your pain the way I'm trusting you with my body. That's when I knew this had become something I couldn't control." Alexander kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. "The arrangement is over," he said when they broke apart. "I'm tearing up the contract." "What?" Sophie sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. "But your grandmother's shares, the inheritance you need." "I need you," he interrupted. "Actually need you. Not as part of a business deal, not as a solution to a problem. Just you. Sophie. As my real wife, if you'll have me. But the money, my father's treatment. Alexander, I can't let you just." He pressed a finger to her lips. "Your father's treatment is covered. Has been since the day you signed. That's not changing regardless of what happens between us. The debt forgiveness, that's done too. You fulfilled your part of the arrangement by being by my side these past months. The $2 million at the end of the year, you'll still get it. This isn't about the money anymore. But then why? Why tear up the contract? Because I'm in love with you," he said simply. "Completely. Irrevocably. In a way that makes the thought of you leaving in 9 months unbearable. I want to build a real life with you. Real marriage. Real partnership. Real everything." Sophie's heart felt like it might burst. "You love me? I think I've loved you since you asked why you at that first meeting. Since you looked at me with those serious eyes and demanded honesty instead of flattery. Every day since has just made it worse. Better, more terrifying, more inevitable." She launched herself at him, kissing him with all the feeling she'd been holding back. "I love you too. God, Alexander, I love you so much it scares me." "Then be scared with me," he said, pulling her close. "Let's be terrified together." They made love again, slower this time, without the urgency of first discovery, but with the deeper intensity of acknowledged feeling. And when dawn began to paint the sky outside the windows, when they finally lay exhausted and tangled together, Sophie felt something she'd never experienced before. Complete. Safe. Home. The next weeks were a revelation. Without the pretense of arrangement between them, without the careful boundaries they'd maintained, their relationship bloomed into something neither had expected. Alexander became openly affectionate, reaching for her hand at dinner, pulling her into his lap while he worked, kissing her goodbye each morning as if he couldn't bear to leave. Sophie learned that beneath the cold businessman exterior was someone hungry for connection, for touch, for the simple intimacy of being known. He started coming home earlier, claiming he wanted to spend time with his wife, emphasizing the word in a way that made her blush. They cooked together, Alexander proving surprisingly competent in the kitchen when he wasn't trying to maintain his untouchable image. They watched terrible reality TV curled up on the couch, his sophisticated facade crumbling as he got invested in drama he'd never admit to caring about. They talked for hours about everything: his vision for making healthcare accessible, her dreams of international medical work, the ways they could combine their resources and passion to actually make a difference. And they made love constantly, Alexander worshiping her body with the same intensity he brought to everything. Learning what made her gasp, what made her beg, what made her whisper his name like a prayer. But it was the quiet moments Sophie treasured most. Waking up wrapped in his arms, the way he made her tea without asking, remembering exactly how she liked it, how he'd started leaving little notes for her, silly things that made her smile, his terrible jokes that somehow became endearing through repetition, the way he looked at her across a crowded room as if she were the only person who mattered. 6 months into what was supposed to be a 1-year arrangement, Alexander came home early with an announcement. "Pack a bag. We're going somewhere. Where? You'll see. Just trust me." She did. Trust had become the foundation of everything between them. The private jet surprised her, though she should have expected it. Alexander just grinned at her shock. "I'm a billionaire, Sophie. Did you think we'd fly commercial?" The destination was the San Juan Islands, a private estate on a cliff overlooking the water. The house was all windows and weathered wood, designed to blend with the natural landscape. Nothing like the sleek penthouse. This was warm, lived in, filled with comfortable furniture and books and signs of actual life. "My grandmother's house," Alexander explained as they entered. "She left it to me. I haven't been here since she died. I thought maybe it was time. Maybe we could make new memories here." Sophie understood what he was really saying. He was sharing another piece of himself, another part of his carefully guarded history. They spent 3 days in blissful isolation. Walking the beaches, making love in front of the fireplace, cooking meals together in the sunny kitchen, talking about futures that stretched beyond contract endpoints. On the last night, as they sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Alexander pulled out a small box. Sophie's breath caught. "I know we're already married," he said, "and I know how it started, but I want to do this right. Ask you properly. Make it real in every way." He opened the box to reveal a ring, nothing like the ostentatious diamond she wore for show. This was delicate, vintage, with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "The only piece of jewelry she kept from her own marriage. She loved my grandfather more than anything in this world. When he died, she never remarried. She used to tell me that kind of love only comes once, if you're lucky. I thought I'd never find it. Thought I was too damaged, too closed off. Then you walked into that lawyer's office looking terrified and determined, and everything changed." "Sophie Chen," he said, getting down on one knee despite already being her husband. "Will you marry me? Really marry me? Not because of a contract or money or obligation, but because you love me the way I love you. Because you want to build a life together. Because you choose me every day the way I choose you." She was crying, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They held each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, as the sky faded from gold to purple to deep blue, as the first stars appeared. "I want to do it again," Sophie said against his chest. "Do what?" "Get married. Really married this time. With our friends and family. With my father there to walk me down the aisle. With your grandmother's memory present in spirit. I want the whole thing. Flowers and music and vows that mean everything." Alexander pulled back to look at her. "Your father. How is he?" "The last treatment round went well. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. They're using one of your company's new drugs, actually. The one you pushed through development faster than anyone thought possible." He smiled, but there was moisture in his eyes. "I may have expedited that particular approval process. Pulled some strings. Called in favors. Alexander. I couldn't save my grandmother," he said quietly, "but I could help save your father. Had to try." That's when Sophie knew with absolute certainty that this man, this beautiful, complicated man who had started as a stranger offering a business proposition, was her forever. They planned the wedding for 3 months later, giving her father time to get stronger. Sophie insisted on handling most of it herself, wanting something personal and meaningful rather than the society spectacle Alexander's position might demand. The venue was the San Juan house, the ceremony scheduled for sunset. Sophie's father walked her down the makeshift aisle on the beach, his steps stronger than they'd been in years, tears streaming down his weathered face. He was still thin, still bore the marks of his battle with cancer, but he was alive, present for his daughter's real wedding day. Alexander waited at the end of the aisle in a simple suit, no armor of wealth this time, just the man she loved looking at her, as if she were his entire universe. The ceremony was small, a handful of close friends. Maria, the housekeeper, who had become like family. A few colleagues from the hospital who had supported Sophie through everything. Alexander's business partner, who gave a toast about never having seen Alexander truly happy until Sophie appeared in his life. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Alexander promised to always see her, to never take her compassion for granted, to build a life worthy of her trust. Sophie promised to call him on his brooding, to remind him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, to love him through the darkness and the light. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was different from every kiss before. This one tasted like promises kept and futures beginning, like coming home after a long journey, like forever finally arriving. The reception was a casual affair, tables set up on the beach, food served family style, music playing from speakers strung in the trees. Sophie's father pulled her aside as the sun painted the sky in impossible colors. "You love him." It wasn't a question. "So much it scares me sometimes." "Good," her father said. "Love should be a little scary. Means it matters. Means you're risking something real." He looked at Alexander, who was talking animatedly with some of Sophie's nurse friends, his usual reserve completely abandoned. "He's a good man. I can see it in how he looks at you. Like you're the answer to questions he didn't know he was asking." "That's exactly what I am," Sophie said. "And he's mine." Later, as they slow danced under the stars, Sophie rested her head against Alexander's chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his arms tightening around her. "That I would sign that contract again in a heartbeat, knowing everything that would happen, all the confusion and the fear and the falling. I'd do it all again just to end up here. Even the 12-hour promise you broke on our first night?" She felt him smile against her hair. "Especially that. Though in my defense, you made keeping that promise impossible." "How did I do that?" "You trusted me. Completely. Do you have any idea what that does to a man who spent his entire life being wanted for what he has rather than who he is? You looked at me like I mattered, like Alexander mattered, not just the wealth or the power. I'd never experienced that before. You made me want to be worthy of that trust." "You are," she assured him, You always were. You just needed someone to see it." They swayed together as the party continued around them, lost in their own world. Months became a year, then 2. They kept the penthouse but spent weekends at the San Juan house, creating memories to replace the grief that had haunted it. Sophie reduced her hospital hours, but didn't quit, using her platform as Alexander Kane's wife to advocate for accessible healthcare, for nurses' rights, for the patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. Alexander discovered that having Sophie as a genuine partner made him a better leader. Her compassion tempered his ruthlessness. Her ability to see people, really see them, helped him understand his employees as humans rather than resources. Together they launched a foundation providing free medications to underserved communities, combining his resources with her frontline understanding of need. They traveled. Sophie got her wish to work with Doctors Without Borders, and Alexander went with her, using his business acumen to improve systems and supply chains in remote clinics. They spent a month in Cambodia, 2 months in Ethiopia, 3 weeks in rural Brazil. Everywhere they went, they worked side by side, discovering that serving others together deepened their bond in ways luxury never could. They fought, because real relationships involve conflict, about his tendency to work too hard, about her habit of putting everyone else's needs before her own, about where to spend holidays, how to handle his difficult board members, whether to get a dog. But they learned to fight fair, to never go to bed angry, to remember that they were on the same team even when they disagreed. They laughed. God, they laughed. At terrible movies and inside jokes, and Alexander's truly awful attempts at cooking anything more complicated than toast. At Sophie's tendency to cry at commercials, and Alexander's secret obsession with trashy reality TV. At themselves, at life, at the absurdity of 2 people from completely different worlds, somehow fitting together perfectly. And they loved. Deeply. Constantly. In ways both grand and small, in morning coffee and evening embraces, in support through difficult days and celebration of victories, in the way Alexander still, after years, looked at Sophie as if she were a miracle he couldn't quite believe, in the way Sophie still touched him with a gentleness that said he was precious, cherished, safe. 3 years into their real marriage, Sophie found herself in the bathroom of the penthouse, staring at a positive pregnancy test with shaking hands. They'd talked about children in abstract terms, someday becoming, eventually becoming soon. But the reality of it, the tiny life growing inside her, felt overwhelming and perfect and terrifying all at once. She found Alexander in his study, poring over contracts with the focused intensity she'd come to love. When he looked up and saw her face, he immediately stood, concern flooding his features. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She held out the test without speaking. He stared at it, his expression cycling through confusion, realization, shock, and then joy so profound it made her eyes sting. "We're having a baby?" His voice cracked. "We're having a baby." Alexander crossed to her in 3 strides, swept her into his arms, and spun her around despite her laughing protests. When he set her down, there were tears streaming down his face. "I never imagined I'd get to have this. A real family. With you. We're going to be parents." She cupped his face, wiping away tears with her thumbs. "We're going to be amazing parents. Our kid is going to have everything we didn't. Love and presence and parents who choose to show up. Every single day." He kissed her then, soft and reverent. "Thank you. For saying yes to that contract. For giving me a chance. For seeing past the walls I'd built. For loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. Thank you for giving me this life." "I didn't give you anything you didn't earn," Sophie said. "You did the work. You opened up. You let yourself be vulnerable." She rested her hand on her still flat stomach. "And now, we get to do the hardest, most rewarding work of all. Raising a tiny human who will probably inherit your stubbornness and my bleeding heart." Alexander laughed, resting his forehead against hers. God help us. The pregnancy was smooth. Alexander became hilariously overprotective, trying to wrap Sophie in bubble wrap metaphorically and almost literally. She had to firmly establish boundaries about her continuing to work, to live her life, reminding him that pregnant women had been functioning for millennia without constant supervision. But his concern came from love, and she couldn't really be angry about that. Her father was over the moon about becoming a grandfather. 5 years cancer-free and thriving, he spent hours boring anyone who would listen with ultrasound photos and speculation about whether the baby would have Sophie's eyes or Alexander's nose. Alexander's grandmother's ring on Sophie's finger felt like a blessing from beyond, a continuity of love across generations. The nursery in the penthouse became Alexander's obsession. He personally selected every piece of furniture, researched every product with the same intensity he brought to business deals. Sophie would find him late at night, assembling cribs and reading parenting books with endearing intensity. This powerful man reduced to terrified wonder by the thought of a 7-pound human who would depend on them completely. On a spring morning when the city was just beginning to wake, Sophie's water broke. Alexander, who had remained calm through billion-dollar negotiations and hostile takeovers, completely panicked. He grabbed the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago, then grabbed 3 more bags of things they absolutely didn't need. He couldn't find his keys despite them being in his pocket. He tried to carry Sophie to the car despite her insistence she could walk. In the chaos and the nerves and the beginning contractions, Sophie couldn't stop laughing. "Breathe, Alexander. You need to breathe. I'm not the one having a baby," he said. But he was panting like he'd run a marathon. "Exactly. So calm down before you pass out and I have to deliver this baby alone." That got him focused. His training, his control, his ability to function under pressure finally kicked in. He got them to the hospital safely, stayed by her side through every contraction, held her hand and let her squeeze until his bones creaked, whispered encouragement and love and promises that she was doing amazing, even when she was cursing his name for getting her pregnant in the first place. 14 hours later, their daughter entered the world screaming her displeasure at the bright lights and cold air. When the nurse placed her on Sophie's chest, still covered in vernix and blood and looking furious at existence, Sophie fell in love for the second time in her life. "She's perfect," Alexander breathed, his finger gently stroking their daughter's impossibly tiny hand. She immediately gripped it, her whole fist not even covering his fingertip, and Sophie watched her husband completely fall apart. "That's my girl," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Already got me wrapped around your finger." They named her Grace, after Alexander's grandmother, Grace Chen Kane, a name that honored both their histories, both their families, both the paths that had led them to this moment. Fatherhood transformed Alexander in ways Sophie hadn't anticipated. The man who had built an empire through ruthless focus became completely undone by a 8-pound infant. He took paternity leave, something his board initially resisted until he made it clear this wasn't negotiable. He learned to change diapers and give bottles and function on 2 hours of sleep. He walked the floors at 3 and singing off-key lullabies, swaying with grace against his chest while Sophie rested. He narrated everything to their daughter as if she could understand. "Now we're making coffee. This is how Daddy survives. Your mommy is a superhero who grew you in her body and then pushed you out. Someday, you'll understand how incredible that is." But more than the practical care, it was the tenderness that undid Sophie. Watching this man who had spent decades building walls, who had started as a stranger offering a contract marriage, who had seemed incapable of vulnerability, completely surrender to loving their daughter with a fierceness that took her breath away. Grace was 6 months old, babbling and grabbing at everything, when Alexander came home early from work with an announcement. "I've made a decision." Sophie looked up from where she sat on the floor with Grace, who was delightedly destroying a pile of board books. "What kind of decision?" "I'm stepping back from the CEO position, promoting Rebecca to take over. I'll stay on the board, maintain strategic input, but day-to-day operations, the 16-hour days, the constant travel, I'm done with that." Sophie's eyes widened. "Alexander, your company is your life." "No," he said, sitting down beside them and pulling Grace into his lap. She immediately grabbed his nose with sticky hands. "You two are my life. The company is just what I do. I don't want to miss this." He gestured to Grace, who was now trying to eat his tie. Her first words, first steps, first everything. "I don't want to be the father who was too busy building an empire to know his own daughter. I don't want to be my father." "You could never be him," Sophie said fiercely. "You're already an amazing dad." "Maybe, but I can be better. Present more. I spent 36 years thinking wealth and power were what mattered. Then, you showed me different. Showed me that the richest men are the ones with full lives, not full bank accounts. I want to be rich in time with you and Grace. I want to coach her soccer team and help with homework and bore her with terrible dad jokes. I want to be there. So I'm choosing to be there." Sophie kissed him, long and deep, Grace squirming between them in protest. "I love you. I love our life. I love that you keep choosing us. Always," he promised. "From that first contract to this moment to every day forward. I choose you. I choose this. I choose us." Years continued to unfold. Grace grew from infant to toddler to little girl, inheriting Sophie's compassionate heart and Alexander's sharp mind, a combination that meant she regularly organized her stuffed animals into elaborate rescue missions and negotiated bedtime with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. She had Alexander's blue-gray eyes and Sophie's smile, and she had both of them completely wrapped around her tiny fingers. They had a second child, a son they named James after Sophie's father, who cried so hard when they told him that Sophie worried about his heart. James was quieter than Grace, thoughtful and observant, content to watch the world while his sister charged through it. Watching Alexander with his son, teaching him to be gentle and kind and unafraid of emotions, healed something in Sophie she hadn't known was broken. Sophie's father became the grandfather he'd always dreamed of being, spoiling his grandchildren and boring everyone with photos and stories. He'd beat cancer, gained a son-in-law who loved his daughter, and lived to see his legacy continue. When he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at 78, it was surrounded by family, having lived long enough to know his sacrifices had mattered. Alexander held Sophie through her grief, understanding loss in ways most people couldn't, giving her the space to fall apart while keeping her tethered to life, to love, to their children who needed her. The foundation they'd started grew beyond anything they'd imagined. What began as medication access expanded into comprehensive healthcare initiatives, education programs, research funding. They worked together, complementary in ways that made them stronger as a unit than either could be alone. Sophie's frontline experience combined with Alexander's strategic thinking changed systems, changed lives, made differences that rippled outward in ways they'd never fully measure. On their 10th anniversary, Alexander took Sophie back to the cafe in Soho, where they'd shared that first dinner. It had changed ownership twice, but the bones were the same. They sat at a table by the window, rain hammering against the glass, just like that first night. "Remember this?" Alexander asked, gesturing to the storm outside. "How could I forget? I was terrified, exhausted. You were this intimidating stranger who'd just offered me an escape that felt too good to be true." "It was too good to be true," he said. "I thought I was getting a convenient solution, a woman who'd play a part for a year and then disappear with her payment. I didn't expect you." He reached across the table, taking her hand. The one that still wore both rings, the ostentatious diamond from their contract, and his grandmother's sapphire from their real proposal. I didn't expect to fall in love. Didn't think I was capable of it. You taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, being present, choosing each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You taught me that too, Sophie said. I thought I had to be strong alone. Had to carry everything myself. You showed me that letting someone help isn't weakness. That vulnerability is actually the bravest thing. That I could be seen, completely seen, and still be loved. They ordered the same things they'd ordered that first night. The food was different, the cook having changed, but the comfort of the ritual remained. As they ate, they talked about their children, about the foundation's next project, about plans to return to the San Juan house for the summer. Comfortable conversations of people who'd built a life together, who knew each other's rhythms and moods and unspoken thoughts. When they left the cafe, the rain had stopped. The city smelled clean, washed new, full of possibility. They walked hand in hand through the wet streets, in no hurry to return home, savoring this moment of just them. Alexander stopped under a streetlight, pulling Sophie close. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking a chance on a contract. For seeing past who I pretended to be to who I actually was. For loving me into becoming someone worthy of you. You were always worthy," Sophie said. "You just needed to believe it." He kissed her there under the streetlight, in the middle of Manhattan, with all the tenderness of their first real kiss and all the depth of a decade of choosing each other. When they broke apart, Sophie smiled. "Take me home, Mr. Kane. To our real home. To our real life. Always, Mrs. Kane. Always." They returned to the penthouse where Maria was watching the children. Grace was still awake, of course, negotiating for 15 more minutes before bed. James had fallen asleep on the couch, his small body curled around a stuffed dinosaur. Alexander scooped him up gently, carrying him to bed while Sophie dealt with Grace's elaborate bedtime routine that now involved at least 3 stories and extensive discussion of the day's events. Later, alone in their bedroom with the city glowing below them, Alexander pulled Sophie into his arms. "Best decision I ever made," he said. "What? Placing that ad for a contract wife? Asking you to marry me for real? Tearing up that contract? Breaking my 12-hour promise on our wedding night?" Sophie laughed, swatting his chest. "All of it," he said, his tone turning serious. "Every choice that led me to you. Every moment that built this life." He gestured around them, not at the penthouse or the wealth or the trappings of success, but at the family photos on the dresser, the children's artwork stuck to the walls, the beautiful mess of a real life fully lived. "This is what I was trying to build with skyscrapers," he continued. "Something lasting, something that mattered. But I was building in the wrong direction. Up instead of deep, wide instead of rooted. You taught me that the most important thing I could construct was right here. This family. This love. This home." Sophie felt tears sting her eyes. "When you walked into that law office, I thought I was selling myself, trading a year of my life for financial security. I didn't understand that I was actually finding myself. Finding you. Finding us." They made love that night the way married people do, with a familiarity that didn't diminish the passion but deepened it. They knew each other's bodies, each other's pleasures, moved together with a synchronicity built through years of practice. But it was more than physical. It was communion. Reaffirmation. Choosing each other again as they'd chosen each other every day for a decade. Afterward, Sophie rested her head on Alexander's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," she admitted. "That we're real. Want me to pinch you?" She laughed. "I'm serious. Sometimes I wake up and think I'll be back in my tiny apartment with the crushing debt and the impossible choices. That this was all some elaborate dream. Then I feel you next to me, and I remember. This is real. We're real. We fought for this. We built this. Together. Together, Alexander agreed, his arms tightening around her. And we're not done building yet. What do you mean? He was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been thinking about something. About expanding the foundation internationally. Really establishing it as a sustainable model for accessible healthcare. It would mean more travel, more work. But we do it together. Take the kids. Make it a family mission. Sophie lifted her head to look at him. You want to take our children around the world? Show them how to serve? How to use privilege as responsibility rather than entitlement? I want them to understand that wealth is a tool, not a trophy. Want them to see their parents working together to make a difference. Want them to grow up knowing that love is an action, not just a feeling. You show it by showing up, by doing the work, by choosing service over comfort. Sophie kissed him softly. You're an incredible man. You know that? I'm a man who got incredibly lucky, he corrected. Lucky that a beautiful, compassionate nurse needed money badly enough to sign a contract with a stranger. Lucky that she saw past my defenses. Lucky that she loved me anyway. They lay together in the darkness, planning dreams and futures, talking until sleep finally claimed them both. The next morning over breakfast, with Grace attempting to feed James pieces of her waffle and James accepting them with solemn gratitude, Alexander brought up the idea. Kids, how would you feel about doing some traveling? Going to different countries and helping people? Grace's eyes lit up. Like on an adventure? Exactly like an adventure, Sophie confirmed. We'd visit places where people need doctors and medicine, where Mom and Dad's foundation could help. Can I bring my medical kit? Grace asked. The toy one Alexander had bought her when she'd announced she wanted to be a doctor like Mommy saves people. Absolutely, Alexander said seriously. Every good doctor needs their equipment. When James was 10 and Grace 12, they took their first extended family trip as medical volunteers. 6 months in rural India, working with local healthcare providers, building systems, training staff, providing resources. The children were homeschooled by a traveling tutor, but their real education happened in clinics and villages, watching their parents work side by side, seeing firsthand what it meant to use privilege in service. Grace discovered a talent for languages and an ability to connect with children even across cultural barriers. James found that his quiet observation skills made him excellent at identifying systemic problems and proposing elegant solutions. Both learned that wealth was meaningless compared to impact, that true richness came from relationships and service and love. They returned to Seattle changed, deepened, with a family bond forged through shared purpose. Alexander looked at Sophie one night after the children were asleep and said, "We did that. We raised humans who care about more than themselves, who understand that they're part of something bigger." "That's all you," Sophie said. "I just signed a contract. You showed them what love looks like in action, what marriage looks like as partnership, what it means to choose service over comfort. We did it together," he insisted. Like everything else, years continued their steady march. The children grew, developed their own personalities and dreams and relationships. Grace went to medical school, following her mother's footsteps, but forging her own path in pediatric oncology. James surprised everyone by choosing social work, wanting to address the systemic issues he'd identified during their travels. Both chose professions of service over the easy wealth their father's name could have provided, and both cited their parents' example as the reason. Alexander and Sophie grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes, bodies softening in the way of people who'd lived full lives. But the way Alexander looked at Sophie never changed. Still that mix of wonder and desire and profound gratitude. Still as if she were a miracle he couldn't quite believe was his. When they celebrated their 25th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren because yes, Grace had started a family of her own, they returned once more to the San Juan house. Just them this time, a weekend alone like they rarely got anymore. They walked the same beach where they'd married for real, hand in hand, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of knowing each other. "You know what I was thinking about?" Sophie asked. "That first night, when you promised to be gentle, I was so scared. Of the physical part, yes, but more of the emotional vulnerability, of letting you in. And? I'm glad I was scared, glad I did it anyway. That night changed everything. Not just physically, but emotionally. It was when we stopped pretending, when we chose to be real with each other." Alexander pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I broke my promise that night. Lost control completely. I'm not sorry about that." "I'm not either," Sophie admitted. "Because it wasn't really about the gentleness. It was about the presence. The way you saw me. Really saw me. The way you made me feel safe enough to be vulnerable. That's what mattered." They stood there as the sun set over the water, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible, watching the day transition to night the way they'd transitioned from strangers to spouses to partners to soulmates. "I'd sign that contract again," Sophie said, "knowing everything, every hard moment, every fear, every challenge. I'd sign it again just to get here. To this life. To you." "You wouldn't have to," Alexander said, "because I'd find you anyway. In that cafe or somewhere else, some other moment. We were inevitable." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Because the alternative, that I might have lived my whole life without knowing you, without this love, it's unbearable. We were meant to find each other. Contract, or chance, or fate. However it happened, we were meant to be." They made love that night in the house where they'd married for real, in the bedroom where they'd spent their honeymoon, with all the passion of new lovers and all the tenderness of old friends. They knew each other completely now, every scar and story and secret fear, and they loved each other anyway. Because of it, not despite it. Morning found them tangled together, the early light painting everything gold. Sophie traced the lines on Alexander's face, each one a memory, a year, a moment they'd shared. "Still handsome, still mine, still yours," he confirmed. "Always yours. Sophie, from that first contract to this moment, to every day until my last breath. Always yours." When they returned to Seattle, to the life they'd built with its beautiful complexity and purposeful chaos, they found their children had planned a surprise party. 25 years, Grace announced as they walked into a room full of people who loved them. 25 years of showing us what real love looks like. James stepped forward with a gift, a photo album that the children had assembled. Every page was a moment from their life together, the contract signing, because somehow Grace had found that photo in Alexander's private files. Their real wedding on the beach. Each child's birth. Foundation openings, family trips. Ordinary moments made extraordinary by being shared. The final page held a letter, written in Grace's careful handwriting, but signed by both children. "To our parents, you taught us that love is a choice you make every day. That marriage is a partnership built on respect and vulnerability and showing up even when it's hard. You taught us that wealth means nothing without purpose, that privilege is responsibility, that the measure of a life is in relationships and service and impact. You taught us by example, by living it, by being the kind of parents who chose presence over comfort and family over everything. Thank you for choosing each other. Thank you for choosing us." Thank you for showing us what's possible when two people decide to be brave enough to be real. We love you both." Sophie was crying, and Alexander wasn't far behind. They looked at each other across the room, across 25 years, across the impossible distance from that contract in a lawyer's office to this moment of being celebrated by the family they'd built together. "Worth it?" Alexander mouthed. Sophie smiled through her tears. "Worth everything." The party was beautiful, full of laughter and stories, and people whose lives had been touched by their work, their love, their example. But Sophie's favorite moment came late in the evening when she found Alexander alone on the balcony, looking out at the city that had witnessed their entire journey. "You okay?" she asked, sliding under his arm. "Perfect," he said, pulling her close. "Just thinking about that scared man who walked into a lawyer's office with a contract and a crazy plan, about the broken person I was who thought he could negotiate his way into an inheritance without risking his heart." "You weren't broken," Sophie said. "Just protected. There's a difference. Maybe. But you broke through anyway. Saw past the armor to the person underneath. Loved him even when he didn't know how to love himself. You taught me what it meant to be truly seen. To be known and still be wanted. That's the real gift you gave me. Not the marriage or the children or the life. Just you. Seeing me. That's all I ever wanted too," Sophie admitted. "To be seen. Not as a nurse or a solution to my dad's problems or a poor girl who got lucky, just as Sophie. As myself. As enough exactly as I am." "You've always been enough," Alexander said fiercely. "From that first moment in the cafe when you sat down drenched and exhausted, but still kind. You've always been more than enough." They stood together watching the city lights, the same view they'd had from the beginning, but everything changed. They weren't strangers anymore. Weren't even the newlyweds trying to figure out how to be real with each other. They were weathered and worn and perfectly imperfect together. They were home. Later that night, after the guests had gone, and the children had hugged them goodnight and returned to their own homes, Alexander and Sophie prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of decades. She removed her jewelry while he changed out of his suit. He brought her tea while she washed her face. Small rituals of care and love that had become so automatic they barely noticed them. But tonight, Alexander paused before getting into bed. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into his study. He returned with a folder, the same folder from that first day, the contract. "I kept it," he said, sitting beside her. "Could never bring myself to destroy it, even after I said I was tearing it up. Because this piece of paper, these cold legal terms, this impossible arrangement, it gave me you. It gave me everything." Sophie took the folder, opening it to see the contract in all its clinical detail. 1 year of marriage in exchange for financial compensation. Terms and conditions. Signatures at the bottom, hers shaky, his confident. It looked so sterile, so transactional. Nothing like the love story it had become. "What do you want to do with it?" she asked. He pulled out a lighter. "I think it's time to let it go. To acknowledge that whatever we started as, whatever brought us together, this contract isn't what keeps us married. Our choice is what keeps us married. Every day, we choose each other. That's the real contract. The one we renew with every morning coffee and every goodnight kiss and every moment we show up for each other." Together they held the contract over the flame, watching it catch and burn. The paper curled and blackened, the words disappearing into ash, the legal agreement that had started everything vanishing as if it had never existed. And maybe it hadn't. Not really. Maybe the real story had always been two lonely people finding each other, two broken pieces fitting together to create something whole, Two strangers brave enough to be vulnerable and discovering that vulnerability was actually strength. The contract burned away, but the love remained. That night, as they lay in the darkness that had witnessed so many of their nights together, Sophie said, "Tell me again. Tell me you love me like it's the first time." Alexander turned to face her, his hand finding hers under the covers, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. "Sophie Chen Kane," he said, his voice soft but certain. "I love you. I love the way you see people, really see them, including me when I didn't want to be seen. I love your strength and your gentleness and the way you make everything better just by being in it. I love that you challenged me, changed me, made me want to be worthy of you. I love our life, our children, our work, our purpose. But mostly I just love you. Today, tomorrow, forever. Every day I get to choose you is a gift I never take for granted." Sophie felt tears slip down her temples. The happy kind that came from being so full of love there was nowhere else for it to go. "I love you too. For all the same reasons and 1,000 more. For being brave enough to break your own rules. For letting me in. For building this beautiful, messy, perfect life with me. For being my partner in everything. For choosing me every single day." They made love one more time, slow and sweet and full of the depth that came from decades of practice and devotion. And afterward, as sleep finally claimed them both, they lay tangled together the way they'd been tangled together for 25 years, the way they'd be tangled together for however many years remained. Two hearts that had found each other through the most unlikely circumstances. Two souls that had chosen to stay through every storm and challenge and beautiful, ordinary moment. Two lives woven so completely together that neither could imagine existence apart. Outside, Seattle slept. The city that had witnessed their first meeting, their contract signing, their real falling in love. The rain that had brought them together would come again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. But inside the penthouse, in the bedroom where they'd shared countless nights, Alexander and Sophie Kane slept peacefully. The contract was gone, burned to ash, and forgotten. But the love remained. The choice remained. The commitment to seeing each other, really seeing each other. To showing up even when it was hard. To building something lasting not through legal obligation, but through daily devotion. That remained, and would remain for all the mornings and nights and ordinary, extraordinary moments still to come. Because some love stories start with passion, some start with chance meetings and instant connection, and some start with a contract signed by strangers who didn't know they were actually signing up for forever. That they were agreeing to transform each other, to break each other open in the best way, to discover that the greatest love often comes disguised as the most practical arrangement. Alexander and Deborah had started their story in a cafe. Alexander and Sophie had started theirs in a lawyer's office, with a transaction that became a transformation. But both stories proved the same truth, that love, real love, is about being seen. Being known, being chosen not once, but over and over again. It's about finding someone who looks past the armor and the fear and the self-protection to the vulnerable human underneath. Someone who says, "I see you, and I'm staying anyway." The rain kept falling on Seattle. The city kept turning. Life kept moving forward with all its beauty and pain and unexpected grace. And in the penthouse, two people who had started as strangers, who had married for money and inheritance and practical solutions to impossible problems, slept in each other's arms. Chosen, seen, loved, forever. Not because a contract said so, but because every single day, through every challenge and celebration and ordinary moment, they chose it. They chose each other, and that choice, renewed daily, was worth more than any inheritance, more than any empire, more than anything money could buy. Sometimes the best things in life start with the worst possible beginnings. Sometimes forever starts with 12 months. Sometimes the deepest love grows from the coldest transaction. And sometimes, if you are brave enough to be vulnerable, honest enough to be real, and strong enough to keep choosing, a contract can become a love story that rewrites every rule you thought you knew about how hearts work. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that love is possible even in the most unexpected circumstances, subscribe to this channel. Leave a like if you believe that being truly seen is the greatest gift we can give each other. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had something that started one way and became something completely different? Something better than you imagined. Your stories matter. Your presence here matters. This community we're building together, it's about more than just romance stories. It's about hope, about believing that transformation is possible, that love can find us even when we're not looking for it, that sometimes the most practical arrangements lead to the most impractical, beautiful, impossible love. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing with me that underneath all our armor and fear and protection, we all just want the same thing: to be seen, to be known, to be chosen, and to find someone worth choosing in return. Until the next story, remember that your own love story is still being written. Every day is a new page. Every choice is a new chapter. And sometimes, the best plot twists are the ones we never see coming.